Okay, so let's talk about something. It might make some people a little uncomfortable. Bankruptcy. Not exactly a fun topic, right?
Right.
But the more you know about it, the less scary it gets.
Right.
And that's what we're going to do today. We're cutting through all the confusion. We've got a great resource to help us out. The complete book on bankruptcy,
Yeah.
written by Peter Francis Geraci.
Yes.
This guy, he's a legend from Geraci Law, and they're known for helping people through some really tricky financial situations. What I love about this book is that it explains everything so clearly, like plain English, you know?
It does, yeah.
So if you've ever wondered what you have to disclose, like absolutely have to disclose during bankruptcy, you are in the right place. And trust me, there are some surprises.
Oh, yeah. There are definitely some things that people don't realize they have to disclose, and it's really important to understand what those things are. One of the things that Geraci really drives home in the book is that bankruptcy is really all about honesty. People might be tempted to hide a few things here and there, maybe a little debt, an asset, but believe me, it's not worth it. The court needs to see the complete picture of your finances,
Right.
to be able to make fair decisions.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would assume they can kind of just, sweep some things under the rug. I mean, that's kind of human nature, right?
It is, but in this case, it can really backfire.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking about some serious consequences.
Yeah.
Fines, your case being dismissed, even, and this is where it gets kind of crazy, jail time.
Jail time.
Jail time. It's called perjury.
Wow.
Intentionally leaving things off your filings. The courts take it very seriously.
Wow. Okay, so jail time, that definitely raises the stakes.
Absolutely. And it's not just about the big things either. People get really creative.
Oh, yeah.
In all sorts of ways. Geraci, he talks about people, transferring property to family members, to friends, hoping it'll just, disappear off the radar. Or they might, quote unquote, forget to mention that savings account they have. Or maybe some cryptocurrency they've, dabbled in.
Oh, right. Yeah. So basically trying to outsmart the system is a terrible idea.
It is a terrible idea. Bankruptcy trustees, folks who oversee these cases, they've seen it all. They're like financial detectives. They know how to find those hidden assets. They can look back at your transactions. If anything looks suspicious, they can reverse transfers.
Yeah.
So in the end, you're not only in trouble for the debt, but you're also in trouble for trying to hide it in the first place.
Right, so it just makes it even worse.
Very worse, yeah.
It's like that saying, what a tangled web we weave.
Exactly. And let's not forget about income. That side hustle you've got going on, that rental property, It all needs to be reported.
Okay, so we've got the message loud and clear. Honesty is the best policy. But what about secured debt? Like if you have a car loan, how does that work with bankruptcy?
That's a great question. It's something that Geraci addresses directly. Let's say you want to keep your car. You need to include the lender on your bankruptcy petition.
Okay.
And then you and your attorney will work out something called a reaffirmation agreement. Basically, you're just saying, hey, I still want this car. I'm committed to making the payments.
Okay, so even though you're filing for bankruptcy, you can still hold on to certain things if you're willing to keep making those payments.
Exactly. But here's where it gets tricky. If you try to hide that car loan, guess what? Perjury.
Oh?
And even if the lender doesn't find out right away, they can still come after you. They can repossess the car later on.
Yikes, I'm starting to see a pattern here. Honesty really is the safest bet. What if you just decide you don't want the car anymore? Can you just get rid of it and the debt too?
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility. You might be able to surrender the car as part of the bankruptcy process and wipe out that debt completely. It all depends on your individual circumstances and the type of bankruptcy you file, which we'll talk about a little bit later.
Okay. All right, so we've covered debts that are tied to stuff you own. But what about everyday bills like rent, utilities? Do those have to be listed too?
Well, it really depends on the situation. If you're up to date on your rent and utilities, you don't need to list them as debts. However, if you're behind on your rent, you're facing eviction, your landlord absolutely has to be included.
Really?
Yeah. And in some cases, listing them can actually help you, maybe even delay or stop the eviction process.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good to know. It sounds like bankruptcy can actually offer some protection in tough situations.
It can. It's similar with utilities. If you have past due utility bills, listing them could actually wipe out the balance and set your account to zero.
Really? Okay.
So it's not just about getting rid of debt. It's about making sure you don't lose those essential services.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So many people worry about just losing everything.
Yeah.
But what about credit cards? Can you keep one for emergencies?
No. Unfortunately not. Any credit card with a balance needs to be included. And even if it has a zero balance, the credit card company will probably cancel it as soon as they find out you filed for bankruptcy.
Yeah.
A lot of creditors, they have systems that automatically flag and close accounts when they see a bankruptcy filing.
I guess that makes sense from their perspective, but it must be tough for the person going through it.
It is. But there are ways to rebuild your credit after bankruptcy. Some banks offer secured credit cards where you put down deposit as collateral. It's a good way to start showing that you're responsible, start building up your credit worthiness again.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. So far, we've mostly been talking about debts you want to get rid of. But what about debts you want to keep paying? Like, say you owe a family member some money. How does that work?
That's where things get a little tricky. After a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, you are legally free and clear of most debts. However, you can still choose to repay any debts you want to, even though you're not legally obligated to.
Okay.
So if you wanted to honor that loan from a family member, you absolutely can. But the key here is you still have to include them as a creditor on your bankruptcy petition.
So even though the legal obligation is gone, you still have the option to do the right thing, so to speak.
Exactly. Now, Chapter 13 bankruptcy works a little differently. In a Chapter 13, all debts are repaid through a structured plan that's approved by the court.
Okay.
You can't just decide to pay certain debts outside of that plan without the court's approval.
It sounds like Chapter 13 is more about reorganizing your finances and creating a more manageable payment plan.
Exactly. But let's go back to that family loan example for a second.
Yeah.
I imagine those conversations can be pretty tough to have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bankruptcy can be a very sensitive topic, especially with loved ones. And that's actually where, Geraci law, they do a really good job of addressing that human side of things. In the book, Peter Francis Geraci actually shares what he calls the case of Bob and his grandma.
Oh,
It's a story about a guy, Bob, who is in a real bind. He owes his grandma $5,000, and he's got $10,000 in credit card debt.
oh, that's a tough situation.
Yeah, he was super embarrassed about filing for bankruptcy. He really didn't want to tell his grandma.
Oh, I see.
He thought that she'd be really upset with him and that she wouldn't lend him money in the future if she found out. And on top of that, he had this old Chevy that he was still making payments on. So it's just another layer of complexity.
So he's got debt, he's got the car loan, and he's worried about disappointing his grandma.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot to deal with.
A lot to juggle. He was really torn about what to do. So what did Geraci law do?
Mm-hmm.
Well, first and foremost, they told Bob that honesty was non-negotiable. His grandma had to be listed as a creditor.
Okay.
No two ways about it. Same thing with the car loan. If Bob wanted to keep the Chevy, he would have to sign that reaffirmation agreement and keep making those payments.
So it sounds like Geraci law was really upfront with Bob, making sure he understood that, playing it straight was really important.
Absolutely. They really emphasized transparency and making sure Bob was aware of all of his options. And here's where it gets interesting. Depending on whether Bob filed for Chapter 7 or Chapter 13 bankruptcy, things would work out a little differently.
Chapter 7 versus Chapter 13. I'm guessing those are the two main options here.
Yeah, you got it. Chapter 7, sometimes called liquidation bankruptcy, is all about eliminating most of your unsecured debts. Things like credit cards, medical bills. It's usually a quicker process. You can get a fresh start fairly quickly.
Okay.
Chapter 13, what's known as a reorganization bankruptcy.
Yeah.
It's more about creating a structured repayment plan, usually over 3 to 5 years.
Okay.
It's a good option if you want to keep assets like a house or a car, but you're having trouble making the payments.
So it sounds like each chapter has its own kind of pros and cons, and it really depends on your individual circumstances, what you're hoping to achieve.
Exactly. And this is why it's so important to talk to a qualified attorney. They can help you figure out which chapter is the best fit for your situation.
Yeah.
Just like with Bob, Geraci law really emphasized that getting good legal advice is the smartest thing you can do when you're dealing with something as complex as bankruptcy.
That makes a lot of sense. So besides just walking people through the legal stuff, what kind of resources does Geraci law offer for people who are considering bankruptcy?
Well, for starters, they offer free consultations.
Oh, wow.
No pressure, no cost, just advice, straight up advice to help you make an informed decision.
That's really great.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. And then they also have this fantastic free credit counseling course that's available at infotakes.com.
Okay.
It covers everything from bankruptcy to credit scores to debt management. It's a great way to learn more and figure out, what's the best way forward for your finances.
I love that they're really making education accessible to everyone. It
Yeah,
shows that they're really committed to helping people.
absolutely. And their experience speaks for itself. Jersey law's been around for over 40 years,
Wow.
founded by Peter Francis Geraci himself. They've helped countless people find financial freedom.
40 years. That's a lot of experience. And speaking of information, we always include a podcast disclaimer for all the legal details, so make sure you check that out.
Good point. Always a good idea to have all the facts.
All right, so we've heard about Bob's situation, but let's kind of dive in a little bit deeper into how things would actually play out depending on which chapter of bankruptcy he chooses.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that a little bit. In Chapter 7, the debt to his grandma would be discharged, meaning he wouldn't be legally obligated to pay her back.
Okay.
However, here's the thing. He could still choose to pay her back, even after the bankruptcy, if he wanted to. The point is, she had to be informed about the whole process.
Oh, okay. So even though the legal obligation's gone, he could still choose to honor that debt if he wanted to. That's really interesting. What about in a Chapter 13 situation?
In Chapter 13, both his grandma and the car lender would be paid back through that structured bankruptcy plan that we talked about.
Oh, so the court would kind of oversee the repayment of both of those debts and make sure everything was handled fairly.
Exactly. But here's something really important that Jersey law actually advised Bob to do.
Yeah.
Have an open and honest conversation with his grandma.
Okay.
They told him she probably already knew he was struggling financially,
Right.
and she would really appreciate him just being upfront about things.
That's a great point. Sometimes these conversations are much harder in our heads than they are in reality.
Absolutely. And that's what I think makes Jersey law so unique, is they understand that bankruptcy isn't just about legal procedures, it's about people's lives, it's about their relationships.
That's a really valuable perspective. So it seems like Jersey law really went above and beyond to not only give Bob legal advice,
Yeah.
but also, some emotional support. That's
Mm.
really impressive.
They do that for everyone. They understand that navigating these situations can be incredibly stressful and overwhelming for people.
Well, we've talked about Bob's case
Mhm.
and the differences between Chapter 7 and Chapter 13. But before we move on, I want to circle back and really emphasize one key point for our listeners.
Absolutely. What's that?
It's all about honesty.
Yes.
Being upfront and transparent throughout this entire bankruptcy process is absolutely crucial.
Couldn't agree more.
Trying to hide assets or debts can lead to some really serious consequences, as we've discussed. The court needs a complete and accurate picture of your financial situation to make fair decisions for everyone that's involved.
Exactly.
And speaking of fairness, it's important to remember that bankruptcy can actually protect people in certain situations, like preventing eviction
Right.
or helping them keep those essential utilities running.
That's right. It can be a lifeline for those facing overwhelming debt.
Absolutely. And while bankruptcy might mean having to let go of some things, like certain credit cards, it's important to remember that there are ways to rebuild your credit afterwards. It's about getting that fresh start, setting yourself up for a more stable financial future.
Right. It's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
It's about taking control of your finances and working towards a brighter future.
And Bob's story really, I think, highlighted the emotional and relational aspects of debt, reminding us that this isn't just about numbers, it's about people's lives.
Absolutely. And Geraci Law's approach, with their focus on honesty, open communication, is so important in these situations. It's about treating people with dignity and respect, even when they're going through tough times.
So we've covered a lot of ground today. What are some of the key takeaways that you think our listeners should really hold on to?
Well, first and foremost, remember that bankruptcy is a legal process. It has specific rules. Trying to play games or take shortcuts is only going to create more problems in the long run.
Transparency is key.
Yeah.
We've said it a million times, but it's worth repeating.
Exactly. Second, it's important to understand that there are different types of bankruptcy, and the best option for you will depend on your specific circumstances. That's why it's so important to get professional guidance. Don't try to go it alone.
Right. Don't be afraid to ask for help. There are experts out there who can make this process a lot less daunting.
Absolutely. And lastly, remember that bankruptcy is not a sign of failure. It's an opportunity for a fresh start. It's about taking control of your finances and building a more secure future.
Those are really powerful words, and it's clear that Geraci law really embodies that same spirit. By offering these free consultations, the educational resources like that credit counseling course, they're truly committed to empowering people. to
Absolutely.
take charge of their financial well-being.
They understand that knowledge is power when it comes to making informed decisions about your financial future.
Well, I think we've pretty much covered everything in Peter Francis Geraci's book. But before we wrap up, I always like to leave our listeners with a little something to think about, a thought-provoking question to kind of chew on.
I like where this is going.
So, if you were in Bob's shoes, how would you have approached that conversation about debt with your grandma?
Mm.
What kind of strategies would you use to navigate such a sensitive topic?
That's a really great question.
Yeah.
It really gets to the heart of the human side of bankruptcy.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that these aren't just abstract legal matters. These involve real people, real
Hmm.
emotions, real relationships.
Sometimes the most challenging part isn't the legal stuff, it's the interpersonal stuff.
Absolutely. It takes a lot of courage and compassion to navigate those conversations effectively.
Well said. On that note, I think it's time to wrap up this part of our exploration.
All right. Let's take a moment to gather our thoughts, and we'll be back with you in a jiffy.
It's really incredible how many different layers there are to bankruptcy. It's not just about the legal stuff, filing the papers.
Right.
There's a lot of emotion involved,
Well, absolutely.
relationships.
Definitely.
It's a big deal.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground already, from, the importance of honesty to those surprising consequences of trying to hide things. I'm starting to understand why Peter Francis Geraci is such a respected figure in this field. The guy really knows what he's talking about.
He really does. And what's so great about the complete book on bankruptcy is that it's not just a bunch of legal jargon. He uses real life examples,
Right.
stories to help people relate to these concepts.
Yeah.
Like that example with Bob and his grandma. That really hit home for me.
Yeah, me too. It really showed that behind all those legal procedures, there are real people dealing with some really difficult situations. Absolutely. It can be, a very sensitive and emotional experience.
Yeah.
And Jersey law, they have this really refreshing approach. They don't just focus on the legal aspects.
Right.
They really care about the human side of things. They get it.
Yeah.
They understand that this is a difficult time for people, and they really go above and beyond to provide support and guidance.
So speaking of guidance, we've talked about how important it is to seek professional advice. But what does that actually look like? What should someone expect if they reach out to a bankruptcy attorney?
Well, first things first, schedule a consultation. Most attorneys, reputable attorneys, including those at Jersey Law, they offer free consultations.
Okay.
It gives you a chance to explain your situation, ask questions, and get a feel for whether they're the right fit for you.
So it's kind of like a getting to know you sort of session.
Exactly. It's important to, feel comfortable, confident with the attorney you choose because, they're going to be guiding you through a very personal and often a very stressful process.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So during that consultation, what kinds of things should someone be prepared to talk about?
Well, they'll probably ask you about your income, your expenses, assets, debts.
Okay.
They want to get a clear picture of your overall financial situation. And they'll probably also ask about your goals. What are you hoping to achieve through bankruptcy?
So really, it's about being open and honest right from the beginning, just like we've been emphasizing.
Exactly. The more transparent you are, the better equipped your attorney will be to help you. They can assess your situation, advise you on the best course of action.
And I imagine they'll also kind of walk you through the different types of bankruptcy and help you decide which chapter is the right fit.
Absolutely. They'll explain the pros and cons of each chapter,
Right.
how it might apply to your situation. They'll answer any questions you have about the process, what to expect.
That's so important because I'm sure it can feel pretty overwhelming, especially if you've never had to deal with anything like this before.
Oh, it can be a lot to take in. But that's why having a knowledgeable and experienced attorney by your side is so crucial. They can really help make sense of everything, make sure you're taking the right steps.
And speaking of taking the right steps, what are some common mistakes that people make during the bankruptcy process? Are there any red flags our listeners should look out for?
Well, one of the biggest mistakes is trying to do it on your own. Bankruptcy law is very complex. There are a lot of nuances that can trip you up. Having an attorney can really make all the difference.
So not a good DIY project.
No, no, it's not. Another common mistake is waiting too long to file. People often try to handle it themselves, and by the time they realize they need professional help, they're already in really deep.
Yeah, makes sense. The longer you wait, the more complicated it's going to get.
Exactly. And another thing to avoid is trying to hide assets or income, which we talked
Yeah.
about quite a bit.
Yeah.
Remember, bankruptcy trustees are skilled investigators. They know how to find hidden information.
It's like trying to hide a beach ball in a swimming pool. It's gonna pop up eventually.
Exactly. Honesty is always the best policy when it comes to bankruptcy.
Okay, so we talked about some mistakes to avoid, but what about some proactive steps that people can take to prepare for bankruptcy?
Well, one of the best things you can do is gather all of your financial documents, bank statements, credit card statements, tax returns, anything relevant. This will help your attorney get a complete understanding of your financial situation.
So it's all about being organized, having everything in order.
Yeah, exactly. Another helpful step is to create a detailed budget.
Okay.
So you know where your money's going. This will be important during the bankruptcy process, but also afterwards.
Okay, so organization and budgeting are key. Any other tips?
Yeah, one more important tip is to educate yourself about the process.
Right.
Read books, articles, reliable websites, learn as much as you can. The more informed you are, the less intimidating the process will feel.
Right. That's great advice. And speaking of educating yourself, Geraci Law does offer that free credit counseling course we mentioned earlier.
Yes.
That could be really valuable for folks who are just, starting to explore their options.
Absolutely. It's a fantastic resource that covers a wide range of topics related to bankruptcy, credit, and debt management.
Okay, so we've talked about the legal side of bankruptcy, the emotional side, the practical steps involved. But what about the aftermath? What can people expect after their bankruptcy case is discharged?
Well, that's when the real fresh start begins.
Right.
Bankruptcy gives you the chance to rebuild your credit, develop healthier financial habits. You can move forward with a clean slate.
It's like hitting the reset button and starting over.
Exactly. Of course, there are going to be some challenges along the way.
Sure.
Your credit score will take a hit. It may be a little bit more difficult to get loans or credit cards in the immediate aftermath. But with time and effort, you can absolutely rebuild your credit, regain that financial stability.
So it's a journey, not a quick fix.
It's a journey. It takes patience, perseverance, commitment to making positive changes.
Right. And it's important to remember that you don't have to go through this alone. There are resources, there are credit counseling services, financial literacy programs, all kinds of things that can help you along the way.
Absolutely. And of course, reputable law firms like Geraci Law that can provide expert guidance and support.
So as we're wrapping up this part of our conversation, I want to leave our listeners with this really powerful thought from Peter Francis Geraci's book. He says, bankruptcy is not the end of the world. It's an opportunity for a new beginning.
Such wise words. It really is a chance to learn from the past and build a better future. Regain control of your finances.
And with the right support and the right guidance, anyone can navigate this process and come out stronger on the other side. So take a deep breath. Remember that you are not alone. And let's move on to the final part of our exploration, where we're going to delve into some even deeper insights, answer some of those burning questions you might have. Okay, so we're back, ready to wrap up our talk about bankruptcy. We've covered a lot, from all the details about what you have to tell the court to the emotional side of things.
It's been quite a journey.
It really has. And one of the things that has really struck me is how important your mindset is during this whole thing. It'd be easy to feel ashamed, like you failed. But Peter Francis Geraci's book really changes that.
Oh, absolutely. Geraci really stresses that bankruptcy is not a failure.
Right.
It's a tool that can help you get your finances back on track.
Right.
It's about taking responsibility, coming up with a plan, and moving forward.
Exactly. It's like hitting the reset button. It's not giving up. It's starting fresh, building a better future for yourself.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I appreciate so much about Geraci Law.
Yeah.
They don't judge. They empower people. They give people the knowledge and the support they need to get through this with dignity and hope.
Speaking of knowledge, we talked a bit about how important it is to really understand bankruptcy, educate yourself about it. What are some key things that people should know before they even think about filing?
Well, first and foremost, it's crucial to understand that bankruptcy is a legal process. There are rules, there are regulations.
Right.
It's not something you want to try to figure out on your own. Get help from a lawyer. It's essential.
Right. Don't try to be a hero.
Right. Don't be a hero.
Get the experts involved.
Exactly. Another thing to understand is that filing for bankruptcy, it's going to impact your credit score.
Right.
That's no secret. It's something you need to be prepared for. But the good news is it's not the end of the world. With some time, some effort, you can rebuild your credit and you can regain that financial stability.
So it's like a temporary setback, not like a permanent scar.
Yeah. Exactly. It's also important to understand that there are different types of bankruptcy.
Right.
Which one's right for you? Well, that depends. Chapter 7, Chapter 13, they each have different eligibility requirements.
Right.
Different processes, different outcomes. A good attorney can help you figure out what the best option is for you.
And speaking of different options, let's talk about alternatives to bankruptcy. Are there other things people can try before going that route?
Oh, absolutely. Bankruptcy should always be the last resort.
Okay.
There are other options out there like debt consolidation, credit counseling, negotiating with creditors. A financial advisor or a credit counselor can help you explore those.
Right. So really exhaust all your options before you make a big decision.
Exactly. Bankruptcy should never be an impulse decision. It's a big decision with lasting impact, so you have to really think things through and get expert advice every step of the way.
And just a reminder to our listeners, we've tried to cover as much as we could today, but we always include a podcast disclaimer for all the legal nitty-gritty, so make sure you check that out.
Always a good idea.
It's always best to be in the know. Well, I think we've reached the end of our exploration of bankruptcy.
It has been fascinating.
It really has. We've talked about all the legal stuff, the emotional challenges, but also the positive side of things.
I really hope our listeners feel empowered to take charge of their financial futures, whether that means bankruptcy or finding some other solutions.
Absolutely. And remember, you are not alone. There's help out there. There are experts, and a brighter future is waiting. So, keep your chin up, stay informed, and don't give up hope.
Beautifully said. I've really enjoyed talking about this with you today.
Well, likewise. And a huge thank you to Peter Francis Geraci for his incredible book, The Complete Book on Bankruptcy. It's such a great resource, really a must-read for anyone who wants to understand this topic better. And to our listeners, thanks for joining us. We'll catch you next time. Until then, keep learning,